Good morning and welcome to Travels with Monkey Boy. Today we are on the journey home from Nepal. Last segment of the trip. I hope you stayed with me. The journey home. We had an option of another elephant ride at 6 in the morning, but we had a long drive to Kathmandu. The Clinks were under pressure to catch a plane, and Jilreen basically said that the next adventure she planned on having involved a hot bathtub. I was a little disappointed because basically the cool thing about safaris is you never know what's around the next corner. But then again, there's always another corner to go around. So I decided I'd had my fill of adventures. And besides, it was something like a 6 hour car ride back to Kathmandu. And I guess the last thing I wanted before I started that was elephant bruises on my butt. There's not a heck of a lot to tell you about the trip back. You go from the flat, steamy jungle up a long, gradual rise to the foothills of the Himalayas. Along the way, you pass a lot of small little villages. But what I found interesting was that you don't pass a lot of cars. The roads were actually quite well maintained. But at one point, I started counting. Okay, everyone was asleep. And I don't mean dozing, I mean drooling, snoring, REM sleeping. At one point, I counted 50 trucks and only two cars. And I counted everything I saw coming towards us passing them, parked in the villages. There were just no cars. I suppose it's an indication of how poor these people really are, but good grief, compare that to Thailand or Indonesia. When we reached Kathmandu, we parted companies with the Clinks, unlikely to ever see them again. Footnote, we never did see them again. They left Saudi for good soon after we got back to Jeddah, not because of the trip. Well, I don't think because of the trip. In the space of 3 months, we had two of our greatest, most adventurous family vacations with them, Tanzania and Nepal. And it's weird. We never really liked them. If you remember from the Tanzania report, they were almost complete strangers to us in October. We met them a few times in the community, and one time we sat with them and the Hendricksons at a Red Sea beach. We were planning our trip to Tanzania together, and Joanne asked us what we were talking about. I told her, and then in a show of bravado, I asked them to come. No one ever says yes to that kind of thing, but Joanne said, sure. Then, when Tanzania was done, they asked us what we were doing for Hajj Eid. I could hardly lie, so I told them Nepal, and they promptly invited themselves along. Okay, they weren't exactly evil, but there was something about Joanne's Croatian background that had her keeping the family in a constant state of war. Joe fought openly with her. They shouted at the kids. The kids shouted back. I mean, I guess it was their way of communicating as a family unit. Alone or in pairs, they were always friendly to us. But it was just a bit too much openness for my liking. I've kind of always believed that these kind of small angers and irritations of the day should be dealt with behind closed doors or bottled up inside until you have enough hatred and anger to kill someone and eat them. But it's also nice to have kids for our kids to play with, and Bethany and Matthew were perfect. It also was okay for us to have other adults to talk to, but we didn't mind departing from them, and we wished them well on their trip. They were making a side trip to see the Taj Mahal, and we raced to our hotel. We stayed that afternoon and the next day in the highest rated hotel in Kathmandu. It turned out it was roughly on par with a really bad, really old, really poorly maintained Hilton. But compared to the Jungle Lodge, or sleeping on the beach, or sleeping in tents, well, it sucked. But it did have showers and bathroom. Okay, I foreshadowed this earlier, but basically, after eating the calzone that first night, that caused an oatmeal the next morning, that caused Joanne to vomit in the village and caused Joe to have a near heart attack, nothing happened. I'm generally a pretty regular guy, and with a bunch of days of hiking and a pretty high fiber diet, I would have assumed the old dietary tract would have been in prime working order. But there is something in modern man that finds pooping in the woods regressive. I basically made up my mind that I was going to hold it. So for me, once we reached the hotel room, I basically spent the next 36 hours in the bathroom. Sure, we took a few breaks. We made an excursion to see Patan. Patan was another ancient neighboring city like Bhaktapur. But at this stage, it looked like the same squalor and filth and temples dealing with sex that we'd seen before. We left after about half an hour. Then we went shopping in Kathmandu for some souvenirs and a rug. It was somewhat interesting because we took rickshaw rides around the old city, but we were all pretty tired of interesting things, so by about 2 o'clock, we headed back to the hotel. On the way, I was somewhat entertained by a cab driver. He spoke very broken English, but he desperately wanted to tell me something. Finally, it began dawning on me what he was saying. He said, "You fat man. You very fat man. Me, I little bit fat. You very fat." Then he patted his stomach and made a gesture of a huge stomach and pointed at me and cackled at me. Initially, I was pretty pissed off. Who is this old guy to comment on my weight? Stupid, ugly country, stupid, ugly man driving a rundown car. He looked about 60, but probably was more like 40. And he's slamming me? So I stiffed him on the tip and huffed away. It was only later that I started to think about this. The guy was probably complimenting me. Everybody in this country looked to be one bad week away from starvation. To be a man of weight signified my wealth. And in his local primitive way, he was probably just trying to tell me how prosperous I looked. That or he was an asshole. Okay, that's it for today. No pictures, no maps. We'll finish up in a little bit.